Welcome to this explainer. You know, when we think of the 47 individuals who've held the highest office in the United States, we usually picture these stoic marble statues, right? Dignified portraits and serious policy debates. But today, we're taking a rapid-fire tour through a side of American history you definitely didn't read about in your 5th grade textbook. We're looking at the highly human, wonderfully bizarre, and sometimes just totally absurd eccentricities of these historical giants.
Just to give you a taste of what's coming, ask yourself this. Which president's brain actually went missing after an autopsy? Who had a pet parrot that swore so much it caused a literal scene? And, wait for it, which commander-in-chief is officially enshrined in the Wrestling Hall of Fame? If you don't know the answers to those, you are in exactly the right place.
Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of this massive wealth of historical trivia, we've organized our journey into 5 quick categories: bizarre pets, strange health and deaths, quirks and odd habits, scandals and crimes, and finally, unbelievable presidential firsts.
Moving right into Section 1, Bizarre Presidential Pets, or as I like to call it, the White House Menagerie. Now, when you think of a White House pet, you probably picture a golden retriever or maybe a cat. But dogs and cats are just the absolute tip of the iceberg when it comes to the animals that have roamed the halls of the executive mansion.
For example, Theodore Roosevelt essentially turned the White House into a zoo. He literally let a blue macaw, a pig, a hyena, and even a small bear roam the property. John Quincy Adams and his wife took a slightly quieter route by keeping silkworms, but Calvin Coolidge might take the cake here. He was actually sent a live raccoon intended for Thanksgiving dinner, but he refused to eat it, pardoned it, and just kept it as a pet instead. And to answer one of our opening questions, Andrew Jackson's pet parrot picked up his foul language and literally had to be removed from Jackson's own funeral because it just wouldn't stop swearing.
Let's transition to Section 2, Strange Health and Deaths, looking at mortality in the Oval Office. So, what kind of physical toll does the presidency actually take on a person? Well, the medical history of the Oval Office is absolutely filled with myths, tragic accidents, and some truly bizarre mysteries. Let's start by clearing up a massive historical myth. You have likely heard the famous story about William Howard Taft getting stuck in a White House bathtub. Well, actually, scratch that. That is entirely fake news. There is zero evidence that ever happened. Instead, we really should focus on an incredible number, 150 pounds. Later in life, Taft prioritized his health and managed to lose an astounding 150 pounds. That is a genuine, amazing achievement, completely overshadowed by a fake rumor.
But, not all medical stories end triumphantly. To answer another one of our opening questions, after John F. Kennedy's tragic assassination, his brain was removed during the autopsy, stored in the National Archives, and then mysteriously went missing, and it remains lost today. Other tragedies were, well, a bit more self-inflicted. William Henry Harrison insisted on giving an 8,400-word inaugural address in the freezing cold without a coat. He caught a terrible illness and died just 31 days into his term. Similarly, Zachary Taylor likely met his end by consuming way too many cherries and iced milk on a sweltering day. Combined with Washington, D.C.'s contaminated water supply at the time, it triggered a fatal intestinal issue.
On the complete opposite end of the fragility spectrum, we have Theodore Roosevelt. During his 1912 campaign, Roosevelt was shot by a would-be assassin from just 5 feet away. Instead of rushing to the hospital, he correctly assessed that he wasn't coughing up blood, realized the bullet missed his lung, and proceeded to deliver a 90-minute speech with a bleeding hole in his chest. I mean, wow, that sheer toughness is exactly why, upon his passing years later, Vice President Thomas Marshall delivered this brilliant quote. Death had to take Roosevelt sleeping, for if he had been awake, there would have been a fight.
Next up is Section 3, Quirks and Odd Habits Behind Closed Doors. Now, what's really interesting here is how a peek into their private, daily routines completely humanizes these historical giants.
We expect the presidency to be this entirely dignified thing, right? Yet John Quincy Adams went skinny dipping in the Potomac River almost every single morning. When Benjamin Harrison became the first president to have electricity in the White House, he was so terrified of being electrocuted, he refused to touch the switches, so he slept with the lights blaring. Chester A. Arthur was so fashion-obsessed he'd change outfits 5 times a day. And Calvin Coolidge? His morning routine involved eating breakfast in bed while a staffer rubbed Vaseline on his head. He can't make this stuff up.
Speaking of bizarre oddities, take a look at this number, 1,400 pounds. That is the weight of a massive wheel of cheese a New York farmer gifted to Andrew Jackson. Instead of doing the normal thing and quietly disposing of it, Jackson bizarrely left it on display right in the entrance hall of the White House for nearly 2 years. 2 years! Just imagine the smell greeting foreign dignitaries walking in there.
Let's shift gears and move into Section 4, Scandals, Crimes, and Duels, looking at the darker side of the presidency. We're going to change the tone slightly here to explore the shocking, unfiltered, and sometimes entirely illegal behavior of the men in the highest office.
Just look at how wild presidential behavior could be. Andrew Jackson is the only president to outright kill a man in a duel, and when an assassin later tried to shoot him, Jackson beat the man so severely with a hickory can that bystanders had to step in to save the assassin's life. Jumping ahead to the 20th century, there is strong evidence that Lyndon B. Johnson essentially stole a 1948 Senate primary by a highly suspicious margin of just 87 votes. LBJ was also known for his total lack of boundaries, famously once urinating on a Secret Service man simply because, in his words, he was the president and he could.
And brushes with the law certainly aren't confined to a single era or a single political party. Back in 1872, Ulysses S. Grant actually got a speeding ticket while riding a horse-drawn carriage in Washington. Fast forward to the modern era, and we have George W. Bush arrested for a DUI in 1976 prior to his political career, and Donald Trump holding the distinction of being arrested after his presidency. It's a striking historical parallel that proves these men have always been fallible.
Let's move on and see how this builds into Section 5, Unbelievable Presidential Firsts and Breaking New Ground. The presidency is constantly evolving, and sometimes that evolution happens in highly specific, incredibly weird ways.
15. That is the record-breaking number of children fathered by our 10th president, John Tyler. Tyler was born way back in 1790, but because he had children so late in life, and some of those children had kids late in life, 2 of John Tyler's grandsons remarkably survived all the way into the 2020s. Think about that for a second. That is 3 generations of one family spanning over 230 years of American history.
Let's rapid-fire some unbelievable modernizations. Believe it or not, it wasn't until Jimmy Carter that we had a president actually born in a hospital. Crazy, right? Barack Obama brought a different kind of first, becoming the only president to officially brew beer inside the White House. And Martin Van Buren? Well, we have him to thank for installing the executive branch's very first luxury indoor toilet.
Before we wrap up, there's a fascinating historical parallel regarding vice presidential age gaps. For well over a century, James Buchanan held the record for the largest age gap with his running mate. He was 29 years older than John Breckinridge in 1856. That 19th century record stood all the way until 2024, when Donald Trump selected J.D. Vance, creating a new record gap of 39 years on the ticket. We've covered missing brains, cursing parrots, skinny-dipping presidents, and 1,400-pound wheels of cheese. So I just have to ask, did you know these facts, or is your history book missing a few pages? The people who've led the country are far more eccentric, flawed, and absolutely fascinating than their official portraits suggest. I hope this explainer sparked your curiosity to dive even deeper into the wild realities of American history. Keep learning.